recording. Oh, it looks like. Oh, okay. All right. So I'm just getting started, but if you want to grab stuff and get set up, we're just picking up where we left off last time. All right. So last time we were looking at the Godot interface. We got through a lot of it. We're just going to look at it a couple more things today. And then I'm going to do a separate video going over building stuff. So let's see. We were looking at the player scene. This just has the player in it. We'll go over how to add that into a regular scene next. But we're just going to keep looking at the interface for a bit. So we covered the file system. We covered the scene view. We used these like menus a little bit. We covered most of these buttons up to like here. And so we're going to cover the last little bit of this and this thing as well. I think maybe we talked about this a little bit. Let's see. Then we're going to talk about the inspector, which does a lot of stuff. And I think that's everything. There's a lot of other stuff in Godot, but there's a lot of like other menus and other windows that pop up for specific things. We'll go over those as we need to. So we went over all this stuff. One thing that we didn't go over is this view section. So one of the things about designing in 3D is that if I'm looking around at this thing or I'm moving stuff around, I might want to be able to see multiple angles at the same time. So this view part is useful. I can add 2 viewports this way or this way, like this, like this, like this. And then I can also change what you see. So the origin, the grid, occlusion culling is like when things are in front of each other. We're going to ignore that for now. There's also different gizmos that you can see. We don't have a lot of them in the scene right now, but for example, there's like a camera gizmo. So if we wanted to get rid of that, we go to gizmos and turn off the camera. It'll go away. So there's other stuff like lights. We haven't added lights yet, but there's other stuff that we might want to hide for a second. So you can do that in the view section. And if you're using this, you can also make this full screen. So that will be easier if you have a lot of stuff going on in the view. I usually do it like this. So you can leave like one thing over here. And then if I move stuff around over here, you can see what it's doing over here. So it's really useful in different ways when you're designing to be able to see things from different perspectives. So you can change the view and you can also make this big or small. I'm going to go back to the regular view. You can change the camera that we're looking at. So if I do orthogonal, this doesn't have perspective, meaning that everything looks like, flat, basically, instead of how we really see things, which is in perspective, where things meet at a point in the distance. So perspective is how most 3D games work, like first-person games. Orthogonal is how certain types of games look, like top games, like RPG games. And depending on what you're doing, looking at something in orthogonal might be helpful because you can see the units more clearly and you can see how things line up more clearly. But perspective is what it's going to look like when somebody's actually playing it, most likely. So you may want to look at it like that as well. You can change the display stuff here so we can see wireframe, the overdraw, unshaded. We can see like stats about the scene down here. So how many objects, materials, all this different stuff, how many verts are being drawn. We can see the frames per second that it's running at. So, if we have like a really complicated scene, we might want to see how fast it's running so the performance doesn't dip too much. We can also just turn that off. We can turn off the environment. We can turn off the gizmos altogether. But normally we want to leave those things. This half resolution makes it just run faster. If you've got a lot of stuff in your scene, it might start to slow down. And so it might make it harder to design stuff and move stuff quickly. So you can turn it to half resolution. It's not going to look as good, but you can see enough information. You can see it. Uh, Focus origin just moves you to the origin, and then that's the O key. So if I'm like over here and I hit O, it's going to move me back. And then the F key will move me to whatever is selected. So if I hit F, it's going to move me to that object. So that's useful. And then there's these key commands for the different views, but they're all the keypad. So if you have a keypad on your keyboard, you can hit those numbers and you'll get all these different views. That's pretty useful when you're designing if you want to just quickly check what something looks like from the top or bottom, and it'll just change the view. If you have a keypad, you can do that. If you don't, you can change the key commands if you want to, or you can just click the gizmo over here to get those views. Okay, so that's enough stuff with the interface. The last thing we're going to talk about, or sorry, with this middle interface, last thing we're going to talk about over here, this window over here has two parts, the inspector and the node window. The inspector has all the properties of a specific object, so whichever object is selected. So if I select the player, we see all the stuff related to the kinematic body. That's the physics object for the player, so it moves around in space. We see the general collision object. We see the transform. So I can like move, you know, the transformation. I can move it on X. I can move it on Y. I can rotate it. I can just type in stuff. I can rotate it by 90. And I can scale it if I want to. I'm probably not going to do that stuff, but I can do those here. This matrix just shows you the transform. It's how the transform is expressed. And then we can turn it on or off. And then there's usually a script down here that you can add code to an object. So that's the last property here. So different objects have different properties. And we click on the object, you'll see those properties in the inspector. So if I click on the mesh instance, we're going to see the mesh, we're going to see the material, the layer, but we have some things in common, like it still has a transform, there's still a script down here. Collision shape has properties for the shape, all this other stuff. So when you click on an object, it shows you all the different properties on the right. So you're using the inspector a lot. We're not going to use it a ton to start, but eventually when we do more interactive stuff, this node section comes in handy. The node keeps track of different events that can happen in the scene. So if you click on something, if you input something into it, if we click on something or we do something on the keyboard, that's how we'll collect it, is with the node signals here. But we're not going to use it a lot to start. Then these buttons up here are just to play the scene. The main play button plays a build of the game. So you don't usually want to use that unless you're playing a build of the game. Usually you want to use the play scene button, which just plays the scene that you have open right now. So that's the player scene, just has the player in it, doesn't really do anything. You can hit escape to get out of it. So usually I use the play scene button. And yeah, that's it. There's a 2D. We're not going to use this that much. We might use it for some UI stuff. 3D is the main scene. Script is where we write the code. We're going to add a little bit. We're going to look at this a little bit next. The asset library is for downloading other things that you want to put into your project. So there's a lot of free open source tools that people make so that you can add in here. So like if you were looking for like an ocean model or something like that, you could type in ocean and, oh, this looks cool. I can download this directly into my project. So there's a lot of cool stuff in the asset library. We may look at that in more depth later, but for now, we're not going to do much with it. But yeah, that's basically it for now. You guys have any questions about the interface? We haven't really done anything, so maybe not. But any interface questions? Okay. So yeah, you'll probably have more questions once we actually start doing stuff.